This is a special program note. At the time that Zach Warren and I recorded this podcast, the IRS was still intending on using facial recognition in the organization ID.me to do facial recognition identification for people doing select actions on the irs.gov website. Since that time, people have really pushed back, and the IRS has backtracked on using ID.me in that way, even though that organization is being used by other states in terms of using it for identity systems. And even though uh, the IRS decided to backtrack on this, we know that this isn't the first, nor will it be the last conversation that we'll have about using facial recognition in identity systems, especially as it relates to government agencies. So, Zach and I had a really great conversation. He actually had some really interesting insights about China, because he has a relative in China, and kind of the differences between what we consider appropriate uses of facial recognition and how we think that may be changing over time. Enjoy the show. Personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a special guest on the show, Zach Warren. He is the editor-in-chief of Legaltech News from Minneapolis. Hello, Zach.
Hey there. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. This is so cool that we're able to do this. So I've known you for many, many years, longer than you've even known me. And that's been a long time, right? So
hopefully in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way.
All right.
Because my work kind of straddles the legal tech stuff, I've been a fan of the publication for well over 20 years. And I like a lot of your commentary and the stuff that you're doing with the organization. I've seen it grown over the years. I've been quoted in Legaltech News for years on a myriad of topics. And it's really cool for us to be able to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, likewise, we've gotten to talk at Legaltech and all these conferences and stuff, but especially something like this, we haven't been able to see each other in person in more than a year at this point. Thank you, COVID. So having any opportunity to chat, I'm very happy to do so.
Yeah, I thought this would be fun. I'm really excited. Well, why don't you tell a bit about yourself? I think you have a really interesting journey, into what you're doing. So being kind of a journalist and something like a content creator before that was even a word, and doing news and stuff, you see a lot of stuff. And then kind of straddling that legal tech space, you're seeing a lot of kind of wacky things that are happening with data. And I read a really good piece that you did a few weeks ago about data privacy. I think it was some people's predictions or something, and they were pretty cool, I thought. But yeah, give a bit of your background and how you got into kind of the straddling this legal and tech space.
Yeah, definitely. So as you kind of alluded to, I mean, I feel like a lot of people come into this from either a hard tech background or a hard legal background, but I'm not really either. I went to school for journalism, went to Northwestern, loved it there. And from there, I mean, I wasn't really looking for anything in the legal sphere specifically. I was just kind of looking around, seeing what journalism jobs were out there. And a friend of mine worked for a magazine called Inside Counsel and said, "Hey, you're looking for something. I know you don't really know many legal things, but go ahead and give this a try, see how you like it." So I popped over to Inside Counsel magazine and I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. I'm talking with people who are highly intelligent, highly motivated, and are interested in kind of moving the profession forward and trying to do something a little bit different. But Inside Counsel, I was there for 2 years. I enjoyed it. But one thing that I really noticed is it was interesting to me, but it didn't really grab hold of what I really know and am good at. So I was at Inside Counsel for about 2 years, but then I realized, it didn't really play to my strengths necessarily, because I did like the tech space, and I feel like I was kind of coming at things from more of a business tech angle, even if I was writing about law. So there was an opportunity when ALM bought Inside Counsel to move over to Legal Tech News under an editor that I knew, Aaron Harrison. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll give this thing a try. And that's where I feel like I really found my niche. I was talking with people who not only were highly intelligent, highly motivated, wanted to change things, but were doing so in a really innovative and thoughtful manner, and using technology and thinking about technology in a really cool way. So that was back 2015. I became editor-in-chief 2016 and been doing that for coming up on 6 years now. It's been a really interesting journey. And I think even within those 6 years, not only has the technology that lawyers use change, but how the legal profession approaches technology with regards to privacy, with regards to data, has changed a lot over that time frame as well, which I know as well as anybody.
Yeah, it has changed a lot. It definitely has changed a lot. I think too, one thing that you've done really, really well is that you really branched out and brought in a lot of different voices. So a lot of some of the publications, many years ago was like, you know, very lawyer focused, which, obviously that's kind of the audience, but there are so many people that are in the legal uh, uh, stratosphere, right? People in the legal orbit that aren't necessarily lawyers, or not necessarily at law firms, or not less necessarily, partner track, or what, they're doing different things in legal. And I feel like you've been able to kind of capture all that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that's something I've actively tried to do. And I feel like at times where Legal Tech News sits as part of a larger ALM and law.com organization can be both a little bit of a blessing and a curse, because at times there's always a little bit of pressure of, you're part of the American lawyer. You need to focus on the AmLaw 100 and what the biggest firms are doing and talk to all of these partners, which is great when we are able to get their insight about what's new and interesting. But kind of the flip side of that is, one thing that I really want to do is take exactly what you just talked about, the voices of the technologists, the voices of the legal librarians, and take it to that American lawyer law.com audience and say, hey, there's a lot of smart people out there who are really trying to do something different and thinking about things in a different way. You should take what they have to say into consideration, because if not, you may be left behind by somebody smarter than you who does exactly that. So I'm really happy to hear you say that. And it's something I think we're going to continue to try to do, is really branch out and get as many voices, smart voices in the room as possible.
Yeah, that's really cool. So yeah, your evil plan is working really well. I think
I
it's
like to
going
think
well.
so. Hope so.
I think there's just been a huge shift. So legal, as you know, has been very conservative forever, very slow to change, very slow to adopt technology. And so you're kind of that sort of leading voice for people who are looking to dip their toe into innovation, whether it be lowercase I or uppercase I, as it relates to kind of the legal space. But then also, I think something really interesting is happening over the last few years, probably even since you've been, editor-in-chief at Legal Tech News, is that sort of, the cloud, right? Where firms maybe were more provincial in some ways. So more like, let's keep stuff on premise, let's not, network certain things, whatever. So obviously we saw a lot of the leading firms with a lot of money were already doing kind of the centralization and all these kind of different data projects to kind of move forward. And what the cloud did is help even the playing field. So for law firms or attorneys or legal groups that didn't necessarily want to make those upfront capital investments, the cloud really helped them that way. And then COVID happened. So whoever was left behind, whoever didn't want to, go to the cloud for whatever reason, like, there were no more excuses. Like, you
Yeah.
either go into the cloud or you don't do business. So, what are your thoughts about that transition?
No, it's 100% true. And I mean, I'm thinking back to even 4 or 5 years ago, which doesn't seem that long, but on the time span of technology really can be. I go to something like an ABA tech show, which tends to have more solo small firm attorneys, and they say, oh, yeah, that's great. Maybe that's something we'll look into in the future. But really, what I'm focused on is just making sure my practice runs. If I'm going to adopt technology, it's going to be maybe a practice management or a document management, something like that. And when I'm focused on that, I'm really focused on what I can have on my computer. That whole cloud thing, it's not that they're dismissing it, but it's just going to be down the road a little bit. But you're exactly right. Not only did the pandemic obviously kind of force people that way, but I think the accessibility of the technology kind of forced people that way as well. I mean, you think about our daily lives and how much of our lives live on the cloud, how much you're doing things through your phones. You expect everything in either your Google Cloud or Apple, what have you, to be connected. And I think a lot of people in law realize, wait, if I'm having that in my personal life, is it out there for my practice too? So it just kind of became not necessarily second nature, but a little bit more comfortable for people to adopt. And part of the societal shift that we saw definitely reflected in my conversations with people as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's definitely cool. Also, I think there's another shift that's been happening probably for over 20 years, and I would love your thoughts on this. So before, I know Goo Gobs are lawyers for over 25 years or whatever, and in the past, it used to be like, okay, I went to this Ivy League school. I got into this great firm. I'm a partner, and king of the world and all this stuff. And it's like technology, yeah, I have these smarts and I can do this job, right? Or this is my profession. And then technology, maybe it can help me do some shortcuts or help, accelerate something that I'm doing. And then now it's sort of like, you can't do your job without technology. So
Yep.
it's not just like, oh, it's a value add. It's like you cannot do your job. And that's what I think that message needs to go across any industry. We're in it. We're both feet into technology right now, and you just have to respect it in that way. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. And I mean, you're the data diva. You know the value of data as well as anybody. But I think a lot of lawyers didn't necessarily get that value. Um, and I think ultimately, like a lot of things in the business world these days, it comes down to dollars and cents. And a lot of lawyers didn't realize that, hey, getting a hold of this data using technology, it's not just it's nice and it's something that my clients would like. No, this translates to operating your business better. Point blank, period. You are going to see ROI by embracing technology, by getting a hold of this data, by using this data in a smart way. And I think to your point, the longer that this technological revolution, software explodes, AI, what have you, people start to realize, oh, wait, there's a little bit more there than maybe I really thought in the beginning. So, yeah, I think it's not only a necessity for people, but people are starting to realize, oh, wait, this actually has a tangible effect on my practice here if I don't do it.
Right, exactly. And a number of years ago, I love the fact, you guys definitely cover, the legal and tech implications of certain cases that come up. And so a number of years ago, you had already started talking about what's happening in the EU, even before, GDPR and stuff like that. And, these cases coming up, they have kind of these legal, these technical aspects that people really need to think about. And it's only just continuing, right, with sort of AI and, Internet of Things. I feel like these things have kind of broken out into kind of the wide open space as opposed to being kind of like a segment in, technology and law.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me when that pops up too, when something we've been talking about for years, like what happens if your Amazon Yeah, what happens if your Alexa records something that you need to get out for discovery? Or, hey, there's Snapchat data that's going to be a part of this litigation. What the heck do I do with that? I mean, it's always fun when we have those sorts of stories, something that we have been talking about really in hypotheticals for years, but it just becomes practical all of a sudden. Like, oh, okay, so what are the lawyers going to do? And that's why I like being in the space that we're in and reporting on the stuff that we do at LTN, because we're talking with a lot of the lawyers that are taking these cases that, hey, there's really no precedent for this, but we've thought about this problem. We've thought through the implications. We've seen places where there might be something that's somewhat similar, and we're just going to go ahead and forge new case law on this. I really like that aspect of the reporting. And it's not something that I think you get not only elsewhere in journalism, but even in the legal sphere, just new stuff. It's exciting. It's cool. I like it.
Yeah, that is really cool. You do a really good job at it. What's happening in technology now that's concerning you? This kind of in the future ahead that you're thinking, wow, this is going to be crazy if this ever happens.
Like, are you talking a new piece of software or regulation?
Either one, it
Okay.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll go a little column A, a little column B. I mean, you know as well as anybody the privacy laws that are popping up, especially in the US, different state laws. You got California, Virginia, Colorado, but I'm really looking in 2022 for those other states, and I expect there to be a few of them. New York is definitely the one that we have our eye on. There was another bill introduced early January, and we'll see where that goes. But especially if some of those big states really hop on board with personal privacy laws, I think you definitely could see a tipping point where it just kind of becomes like data breach notification, and every state kind of has their own thing. Um, yeah, I don't know if you had something there.
think I think you're right. I mean, there's enough examples, right, on a state level of what's happening with these state laws, and they're kind of like stair steps, right? So some are bigger or grander than others, and we're seeing, these states kind of borrow from one another in terms of kind of language. I guess the one thing that concern me about the state laws, obviously, is creating more complication, especially because not every state is going to, for example, describe personal data or sensitive data the same way. And then in some ways, I feel like the states are trying to be more bespoke because they don't want to be like, oh, we copy California or whatever. Like we're Washington, we're gonna do this new thing. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
about that?
Nah, that's a really good point, and not something that I've given too much thought to, but you're 100% correct. Just kind of the human element of all this of we're going to we're Louisiana, so we're going to have a Louisiana spin on this privacy law. And it definitely does make it more complicated. I mean, I brought up data breach notification, where it's become a thing where some states you have 30 days, others you have 60 to notify. Are you going to do it by mail? Can you do it by email? How are you managing all of this data, and what are you doing to work with the government? I definitely foresee a potential future where it's the same exact thing with privacy of, okay, well, you're holding all of this data, and yeah, kind of to your point, what are you going to do about requests to take down that data? How long do you have to comply? Who do you have to notify? There are so many different little variables to this that you can pick apart, where not it's going to be a headache for privacy attorneys, but kind of in a perverse sense, it also provides an opportunity for privacy attorneys, because they're going to be more needed than ever here very, very shortly to try and parse through all this stuff, because there's going to be so much out there.
Yeah, totally, totally. Well, I mentioned a piece that you published a few weeks ago about like privacy predictions. You're really good at predicting stuff, so I love like we've been on panels together, and people ask us about Outlook, and you're very big tent in terms of the outlook. So I love the way that you kind of think out of the box there. What were there anything in those predictions that's kind of surprised you, or you thought, oh, I hadn't thought about that?
I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And thank you I'm glad you were able to read it because I like those predictions articles too. And I know a lot of people do kind of set the stage for 2022. One that really caught my eye that I think is interesting and kind of a tangent to the state laws we were just talking about is biometric data and what's going to be happening with all that. I mean, the Illinois BIPA has been in place for a few years now. There's a big Six Flags case off of it, but we didn't really see much movement elsewhere about how exactly to handle this biometric data. Well, now you're starting to see New York stuff coming out there, and I think that's going to kind of be the next frontier, particularly because it's one thing for maybe your address or even social security data to be out there, but fingerprints, retina scans, biometric data that is much easier to store and actually get these days just because of technology. I think it kind of, in the general public, people take a look at that and say, oh man, that's so personal. And I don't know necessarily that I want people having that data or the ability to store that data. So the recognition that it can be stored, I think will probably get a visceral reaction out of people more so in the coming years as there's general public awareness that it's out there.
Definitely, especially because there isn't really any good legal recourse for that, you know.
Yeah.
So let's say if someone breached your biometrics, like do you get a free credit reporting for a year or something? I don't know.
A free thumbprint change to make
Yeah.
sure that you're safe. It doesn't exactly work that way.
Well, actually, to bring this up, this is a topical thing. I'm sure you know you guys are covering that the IRS now wants to do facial recognition for, you know, to try to tap down on fraud and stuff. So people who have online accounts and do stuff on the IRS website, you may have to, you know, send in a utility bill. You know, do facial recognition. Maybe you do like a video interview with people. So I mean, that's really Big Brother
Yeah. Oh,
type
yes, it is.
stuff. Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, it's interesting, right? It just the privacy of it all. It makes me think too, because throughout the pandemic, my brother-in-law has been living in China, and he would talk to us about like, oh, they were under lockdown before we were. So he's like, yeah, I mean, it's interesting where people are coming and delivering us food and stuff like that. But they also had a state-run app, which would essentially scan your face, make sure you're you, then have an authenticated, yes, ultimately, yes, I've been vaccinated. And that's how you go into the grocery store. You have to show it. That's how you get into bars. And on the one hand, it's very easy and convenient. Like they were out of lockdown before we were just because they had that state-run system to authenticate people. But on the flip side, man, that's a lot of data to be having out there
Right.
to not only have all of your medical data in one place, but also have the face scan, have everything right on your phone. And what happens if that's breached? What happens if that's taken? Well, sorry. So it's a fine line that I think we're going to be running here in the very near future between convenience and personal privacy. The journalist in me, the fourth estate, doesn't necessarily want to pontificate where I stand on that line.
Right.
But other than to say that I think there's going to be a lot of debate about it. I mean, moving forward, particularly as stuff like the IRS and the government gets involved, I
Oh
think
yeah.
people's ears definitely perk up at that.
Definitely. That's definitely going to be in the news for a while. You know, I think I think the conventional wisdom a while back was that people don't really in the US don't really care about privacy. And I think Apple kind of disproved that. So with a lot of their privacy enhancing things, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence they had some of their biggest, you know, profitable quarters once they release that. Because I think consumers are looking for help in those areas, right? We need all the help that we can get. And, you know, it's just so much technology, so much data buzzing around, and then people aren't really sure what happens to their data. So giving people kind of a sense of agency or control, I think will, that's the reason why I think this IRS thing that they're doing is going to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, and something you said there that really got me thinking is just the awareness, awareness of what exactly is happening with your data and the fact that a lot of people simply don't know. It's not that they necessarily don't approve of it, it's just they don't know what's happening and where it is. So it I part of the interest for me is going to be not even just like pushback against some of these actions and people who don't want their data in XYZ, but just what happens when people are aware that this exists. Because I think we're kind of on the front lines and are a lot more aware as people who are working in privacy, as people who are working in law, than maybe the general public. But as the general public starts to think about these questions a little bit more, I don't even know necessarily that they're not going to be okay with it, but I just am very curious as to what the reaction is going to be, because I think it could go any number of ways.
Oh yeah, I think, there isn't enough transparency there, and we're seeing a lot of laws and regulations. Almost all of them have kind of a transparency factor in it. So I think that even if it's still 80 pages of documentation, there's going to be someone somewhere is going to read that 80 pages. And, because we saw that with WhatsApp. So WhatsApp had a data privacy policy change. And normally, no one says anything about it, but it was like a big hubbub about it because someone wrote an article, wrote something like, "Hey, did you see this?" And people were kind of upset, and a lot of people, decided to go to find other apps, So to me, it's all about agency and choice. So, once here's what is happening. If you don't like it, you can go to kind of another provider or something like that. So I think, that I'm hoping over the next few years we get to a place of transparency where people can have some, I don't know, we'll get completely in the US to a place of informed consent, because I feel like we just do the consent and not be the informed part. But maybe we'll get there.
Yeah. And I mean, thinking back to my predictions too, another one of those dealt with children's privacy. And man, have you seen how much data TikTok stores and their algorithms and what they know about you? I think as stuff like that becomes more well known as well, not only for personal, but I personally don't have kids, but it's probably coming in the future. And it worries me a bit what my future 6, 7, 8-year-old is watching on YouTube, TikTok, and just all of that data being collected. I think that could even have more of a reaction than even personal data.
Oh, totally. Right. Because you don't really know. And that goes back to transparency. You don't know first of all, you don't know who's collecting the data. You don't know who's sharing the data. That's one thing that especially laws like the CCPA in California is trying to capture, which is that third party data sharing or data selling or something. So being able to try to create some type of consent mechanism or transparency around that, so people at least have some idea. Right now it's just kind of a free-for-all, especially with like data brokers and things. We just have no idea.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately going to be the good that comes out of this the Wild West part of things. It's tough. Like, even if you do have a patchwork of state laws, like we were kind of talking about earlier, yes, it's a pain in the butt to really try and comply with everything and make sure everything's in order. But ultimately, at least for the people, I feel like it's better to have some sort of guardrails there, even if they're guardrails with jagged edges, than to just have nothing and you can go wildly off course. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, we definitely, we definitely have some gaps. We actually in the US, we have pretty strong laws around children. So I think that's
Yeah.
probably our strongest, most comprehensive federal law around children, right? It's kids everywhere. So being able to handle their privacy, I think is a big issue and it's a big challenge because we're seeing a lot of tech companies try to move, gently into that space, or maybe get their hands slapped by the FTC if they run afoul of kind of those child privacy laws, especially with technology. Yeah. So if it were the world according to Zach, and we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for privacy, whether it be law, technology, regulation, human behavior?
A dangerous place. Do you necessarily want to be in the world according to Zach?
Yeah, of course, yes.
That's a tough question though, because I feel like everybody kind of comes at this from a different angle, where my hope more than anything is that people's data can be as private as they want it to be, which seems very general. And it's very tough to ascribe some sort of regulation or law or guideline around that, because everybody, kind of like you said, I mean, the US has different thoughts about privacy, maybe than the EU, than Asia does. And then within subsets, I mean, I'm up here in Minnesota. There's a lot of people in rural Minnesota who don't talk to too many people, just kind of live insular. I mean, I'm up here in Minnesota, and I think there's going to be some people out in rural Minnesota who probably have a different idea of what privacy means than somebody living in downtown Manhattan. I mean, so I don't know necessarily that I have a distinct answer to your question, other than I wish there were some sort of mechanism or way that everybody can be as comfortable with the amount of their data that's out there than others. But I feel ultimately that's probably a little bit of a pipe dream, unfortunately. So it's just a matter of helping as many people as we can feel that their data is secure and private as possible.
That's a great one. I love that. I asked that question to all my guests and no one answers it the same way. So that's really cool.
I like that question too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Makes you think.
Yeah.
That's not something I thought too much about, quite honestly.
I don't think Warren Buffett has privacy problems. I don't. What do you think? I'm thinking maybe he has different, things that he's thinking about. But I think it's something that it impacts humans, right? It impacts everyone, so everyone has kind of a stake in it, and that's really one of the really great reasons why I thought you'd be a great person to talk to, because you're seeing this, you're seeing the laws, the regulation, you're seeing the wacky technologies and stuff, and there's a convergence that's definitely happening. It's like, to me, the technology is going, technology always outpaces law, right? Just has to, because law is a lot thinking backward in terms of, precedent. And, like you said, you're looking at people in legal cases that, they don't have any precedent for. So it's kind of a wild west in that way. But I feel like technology is accelerating to the point where instead of it being years ahead of law, it's going to be light years ahead. What are your thoughts?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we're seeing, especially cases right now, like I edited an article earlier today that talked about cryptocurrency and divorce. Like, how the heck do you manage that? Because I mean, you could hypothetically just split it down the middle, but then there's a question of who holds the key, and cryptocurrency is unregulated. So what if you pay out to one person, but then it doubles by the time you can pay out to the other person? There's so many of these questions that just keep popping up. And yeah, to your point, the pace of law is kind of on a straight line where it will increase and it will adapt eventually, but it's kind of inherently, because of the way cases move, designed to adapt in a straight line. Technology isn't going in a straight line. Technology is exponential. Technology is going quickly. So as that gap continues to get wider, how exactly court systems will keep up is definitely a big question that, frankly, I don't think anybody has a really good answer for right now.
Yeah, we have to come back together and chat about this in a couple of years and see how our predictions panned out.
Truth. I'd like that.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's really great to chat with you. I'm a very big fan of your work and just keep up with your work at Legal Tech News.
Well, thank you very much. I'm a big fan of yours as well, and I really appreciate you having me on today.
Very nice. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.